King Charles had always viewed Highgrove as more than a royal residence. It was the one place where duty gave way to peace, where decades of memories quietly lived behind its gates. But everything changed the moment he signed a confidential document that permanently removed Camilla's authority over the estate and entrusted its future to Princess Catherine. There was no public announcement, no ceremonial gathering, and no warning before the decision was finalized. The transfer was far more than a legal adjustment. It sent a powerful message about trust, succession, and the future direction of the monarchy. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe so you never miss our latest royal updates. Charles rested his hand on the completed papers for several seconds before letting them go. The estate transfer officially ended Camilla's role at Highgrove and granted Catherine long-term stewardship of the property. That responsibility meant far more than ownership. She would oversee the preservation of the estate, protect its traditions, and help carry it into the next generation of the royal family. A senior palace official quietly observed the king as he stepped away from a document. Highgrove had never been just another country residence. It was Charles's personal sanctuary, shaped over decades through his gardens, environmental projects, and private routines away from royal ceremony. It reflected the life he built beyond public appearances. By choosing Catherine, Charles was deciding who would safeguard one of the most personal parts of his legacy. Camilla received the official notice in private. At first, she reread the opening paragraph, convinced there had been an error. But as the meaning became clear, disappointment quickly turned into quiet disbelief. The decision was permanent. Her authority over Highgrove had been removed completely. For Camilla, the estate represented security after years of public criticism and personal struggle. Losing that role felt deeply personal. Catherine learned about the transfer through a sealed briefing delivered by one of the king's trusted aides. She quickly realized her appointment was not symbolic. Charles had entrusted her with genuine responsibility over Highgrove's future and its place within the next reign. The aide also revealed that the paperwork had been prepared in complete secrecy. Only a very small group inside the palace knew about the plan before it was signed, ensuring there was no opportunity for objections beforehand. The atmosphere shifted again when another message arrived. Camilla had requested an immediate private meeting with the king. Without hesitation, she left the room carrying the official notice, determined to confront Charles directly. Meanwhile, Catherine remained silent, understanding that one signature had settled one question while creating another far more emotional conflict. As Camilla walked toward the king's private room, the issue was no longer whether the transfer could be reversed. The only question now was what she would say when she finally stood face to face with the man who had made the decision. Behind the legal paperwork stood three people, each holding a completely different view of Highgrove. For King Charles, it had always been his private retreat. For Camilla, it symbolized acceptance after years of criticism and public resistance. For Catherine, it was an unexpected responsibility she had never actively sought. Yet the transfer forced all three to face one difficult reality. Within the royal family, a residence is never just a home. It also represents trust, legacy, and the future of the crown. Over the years, Charles had shaped Highgrove into a reflection of his own values. Its gardens displayed his lifelong commitment to the environment, while its quiet rooms preserved memories of raising William and Harry away from public attention. Whenever royal duties became overwhelming, the estate offered him a rare sense of normal life. To the king, Highgrove was not simply property. It was one of the last places where his personal identity remained untouched by royal expectations. Catherine carefully finished reading the transfer summary while William watched her expression. She understood exactly why Charles had chosen her. As the future queen, she would eventually help guide the monarchy into its next chapter. Even so, she could not ignore the emotional weight attached to the decision. Receiving Highgrove felt less like a reward and more like stepping into someone else's painful history. William quietly acknowledged her concerns. He knew the estate would provide stability for their family and future generations, but he also realized many people would accuse Catherine of benefiting from Camilla's loss. He gently reminded her that the decision had been made entirely by his father. Neither of them had requested it, although those words did little to ease the discomfort surrounding the situation. Camilla experienced the news in a very different way. Standing inside one of Highgrove's familiar rooms, she slowly ran her hand across a polished cabinet she had known for years. Every corner of the estate reminded her of a time when she had finally found acceptance after decades of public criticism. Now she understood that those same rooms would gradually become part of Catherine's future, while her own connection to them faded into memory. The tension increased when Catherine reached the final section of the documents. Charles had included a personal instruction stating that Highgrove should support William, Catherine, and their children throughout the next reign. That single instruction transformed the transfer into a long-term succession plan. It was no longer simply about removing Camilla's authority. It was about securing the future of the next royal generation. As Catherine continued reviewing the paperwork, one detail immediately caught her attention. The drafting date showed the documents had been prepared several weeks before the official signing. According to a palace official involved in the review, Charles had quietly planned the transfer while continuing ordinary family meetings as though nothing had changed. Emotionally, he had already accepted the separation long before anyone else discovered it legally. William began asking himself what had happened during those hidden weeks. The answer would eventually lead back to one private evening at Highgrove, one confidential proposal, and one conversation that permanently destroyed the trust Charles believed still remained. The transfer of Highgrove was not simply the result of growing distance over time. Everything changed because of one private conversation that quietly altered the course of the family's future. Every major royal disagreement begins with a single moment that later becomes impossible to forget. For Charles and Camilla, that turning point arrived during a private dinner at Highgrove. What started as a discussion about Catherine's future gradually became something far more serious. One confidential folder was placed on the table, and by the end of the evening Charles realized the woman beside him was prepared to challenge the succession plans he had already begun protecting. In the weeks leading up to that dinner, Charles had been reviewing the future of the royal family's private estates. His goal was to ensure that homes, staff, and responsibilities would pass smoothly to the next generation without creating unnecessary conflict after his reign. Highgrove stood at the center of those discussions. The king believed the estate should eventually become a lasting home for William, Catherine, and their children. Camilla, however, believed her own place there should remain secure for the rest of her life. Neither of them openly expressed every concern, yet both understood that Highgrove had become much more than a residence. It had quietly turned into a measure of trust and legacy. During that private dinner, Camilla finally broke the silence. She carefully placed a prepared folder beside Charles and asked him to review it before making any permanent decisions. Charles slowly opened the document and read several pages without saying a word. After finishing, he quietly closed the folder and placed it back on the table. He then looked at Camilla and asked whether she truly expected him to reduce the future queen's authority. Camilla calmly replied that she was not trying to diminish Catherine's position. She believed she was simply protecting the place she had earned through years of loyalty, sacrifice, and public hardship. But the proposal contained far more than Charles had anticipated. According to a documented account later reviewed by a senior household official, the plan would have allowed Camilla to retain control over important sections of Highgrove even after William became king. Key rooms, household appointments, and ceremonial privileges would remain under her authority while Catherine carried the responsibilities of the next reign. Charles quietly removed his glasses and placed them beside the folder. His voice never rose, yet every sentence carried unmistakable weight. He told Camilla that Highgrove could never become a source of division between the present queen consort and the woman who would one day stand beside the next monarch. Camilla refused to withdraw the proposal. Looking directly at him, she insisted she would not simply disappear once the succession moved forward. The following morning, Charles ordered a complete review of the Highgrove documents under strict secrecy. At that moment, Camilla's attempt to secure the estate had unintentionally triggered the very outcome she had feared from the beginning. When she later walked into Charles's private room to challenge the final transfer, both of them remembered the folder that had remained between them that evening. Neither was willing to step back. Camilla entered the room not simply as the queen consort, but as a wife who believed the place she valued most had been taken away. Charles remained standing near the fireplace with the signed transfer papers resting on the table between them. After a long silence, Camilla finally spoke. "You gave my home to her." Those few words stripped away every royal title and revealed the personal hurt beneath the decision. She pulled a chair back and demanded to know why Catherine had been chosen without even one private conversation. There were no advisors present, no palace officials, and no one available to soften what followed. Only hours earlier, she had received formal confirmation that her authority over Highgrove had officially ended. To her, the decision felt far more painful than a legal document. It had become a deeply personal wound inside their marriage. Charles answered calmly without raising his voice. He explained that Catherine had never requested Highgrove and should never be blamed for a decision she had not made. Camilla immediately disagreed. From her perspective, the transfer itself guaranteed that Catherine would become part of the story. Every room entrusted to the future queen felt like another chapter of her own life being quietly erased. The discussion quickly returned to the confidential proposal she had presented weeks earlier. Charles reminded her that the transfer had followed her attempt to retain control of Highgrove beyond his reign while limiting Catherine's future authority. Camilla defended herself. She insisted she had only been trying to protect the one place where she had finally felt accepted after years of public criticism and personal sacrifice. Then the conversation shifted in an unexpected direction. Camilla revealed that William had already known about the succession plans before the papers were signed. According to a documented private household account, she believed the Prince of Wales had discussed the future arrangements with his father well before the official transfer. To her, that meant William had quietly supported the decision. Charles acknowledged that William understood why Highgrove needed long-term protection, but firmly refused to place responsibility on his son. The king made one thing absolutely clear. The final decision had been his alone. He then opened a nearby drawer, removed Camilla's duplicate key to Highgrove, and gently placed it beside the signed documents. Camilla stared silently at the key. For years it had represented belonging, privacy, and unquestioned access. Now it marked a boundary she could no longer cross. She warned Charles that removing her from Highgrove would divide the household and force members of the royal family to take sides. Charles looked at her quietly before replying. "The division began long before I signed those papers." His answer ended the argument, but not the deeper conflict. Because behind Charles's personal decision stood a far broader royal plan, one that had already been carefully protected long before Camilla ever entered the room. The strongest royal decisions are rarely made through public confrontation. They are protected by confidential instructions, trusted witnesses, and carefully prepared legal documents designed to withstand emotional pressure. While Camilla struggled to understand how Highgrove had slipped beyond her reach, Catherine discovered that the transfer rested on far more than Charles's personal wishes. The king had quietly built multiple safeguards around the decision, ensuring it could not easily be challenged once completed. William sat beside Catherine as she carefully reviewed the final conditions attached to Highgrove. Stewardship involved much more than receiving a royal residence. It meant accepting responsibility for the estate's long-term care, preserving its traditions, managing the household, and protecting it for future generations. As the future king, William understood why those responsibilities mattered. When the crown eventually passed to him, private family disagreements could never be allowed to weaken the stability of the monarchy. After reading the documents, Catherine lowered the papers and admitted that perhaps refusing Highgrove would prevent further pain within the family. William gently shook his head. He explained that giving up the estate would not repair Camilla's relationship with Charles or undo what had already happened. It would simply reopen a decision the king had made to protect their children and prevent another conflict after his reign. Even so, Catherine remained uneasy. She quietly confessed that history might remember her as the woman who received a royal home only because another woman had lost hers. William reached for her hand. He reminded her that responsibility should never be confused with victory. Catherine had never requested Highgrove, and accepting an obligation did not mean celebrating someone else's heartbreak. The documents contained one additional safeguard that surprised even Catherine. According to a documented account from one of Charles's advisors, the legal conditions prevented Highgrove from being divided, privately reassigned, or transformed into an alternative royal household connected to Camilla after Charles's reign. The wording left almost no opportunity for the transfer to be reversed. Camilla later learned the same truth during a confidential meeting with one of her trusted advisors. He quietly warned her that challenging the decision publicly could expose the confidential proposal she had previously submitted, including her attempt to limit Catherine's future authority. Camilla immediately understood the danger. A public legal dispute could change how the entire country viewed her. Instead of appearing as someone hurt by the decision, she risked being portrayed as someone attempting to influence the next reign. For the first time, remaining silent became the safest option. But silence did not mean acceptance. Unable to overturn the transfer itself, Camilla shifted her attention toward the household, hoping familiar staff, long-standing traditions, and personal relationships might allow her to preserve at least some influence inside Highgrove. Then another official notice arrived. Household appointments were changing. Access permissions were being updated. Daily responsibilities were already passing into new hands. The signed document had removed her authority legally. Now, The changes taking place inside Highgrove would make that loss impossible to ignore. A royal transfer does not truly become real when the paperwork is signed. It becomes real when familiar routines suddenly begin to disappear. The first official household notice arrived early the following morning. Staff assignments were revised. Private rooms were scheduled for inspection. Access permissions were updated throughout the estate. Standing quietly in the corridor, Camilla held the notice in her hands as the reality finally settled in. Years of familiarity had been reduced to a carefully organized departure schedule. For the first time, she realized Charles had not been issuing a warning. He had already begun removing her place within Highgrove. She slowly read the document again, tightening her grip as every sentence confirmed what she had hoped was impossible. Her private office would no longer oversee household matters. Any future visits would require prior approval. Representatives acting on Catherine's behalf had already started reviewing the estate. That review included household traditions, private archives, staff responsibilities, and plans for the property's long-term future. Camilla quietly asked whether even her personal sitting room would have to be cleared. Charles heard the question while standing nearby. Several boxes had already been prepared with great care, and although the king appeared deeply affected, he understood that delaying the process now could reopen the conflict and leave William's future household facing the same dispute for years to come. He did not withdraw the order. Instead, he simply instructed every member of staff to treat Camilla's belongings with dignity and respect. Catherine, meanwhile, refused to treat the transfer as an immediate occupation of the estate. She accepted responsibility for protecting Highgrove's gardens, preserving its traditions, safeguarding its private archives, and ensuring its place within William's future household. Her role was never simply to move into a residence. It was to preserve everything Charles had spent decades creating. Another moment of tension followed when palace staff prepared to examine a sealed cabinet. According to a documented household account, it contained private correspondence concerning Highgrove's future, including Camilla's original proposal requesting permanent control and Charles's handwritten response rejecting it. If those documents became public, they would reveal the exact disagreement that had broken the trust between them. Before any further rooms were opened, Catherine issued one written instruction to the household. No member of staff was to touch any of Camilla's personal belongings without her direct approval. The order surprised everyone. It also challenged the growing belief that Catherine intended to humiliate the queen consort. Instead, she chose to protect the dignity of the woman whose responsibilities she had inherited. When Camilla learned about Catherine's instruction, she remained silent for a long time. Her anger did not completely disappear, but something inside her began to change. Rather than demanding another confrontation with Charles, she requested one final private meeting with Catherine. With the king away and palace advisors deliberately kept outside, the two women would finally meet alone. No legal documents. No official titles. No one else standing between them. There were no advisors in the room. No private secretaries. No legal officials. For the first time since the transfer, Catherine and Camilla faced each other without titles, formalities, or anyone speaking on their behalf. Catherine entered knowing every word carried the potential to deepen an already painful family divide. Camilla remained standing near the window, no longer holding the authority she had fought so hard to preserve. For several quiet moments, neither woman spoke. Then Catherine gently placed the Highgrove documents on the table. That simple gesture changed the atmosphere immediately. As the new steward of Highgrove, Catherine now carried formal responsibility for the estate's future, its preservation, and its place within the royal family. Yet with that responsibility also came the freedom to decide how the transition would unfold. She could insist on a cold and immediate departure, or she could allow compassion to guide the process. Both women had requested complete privacy because neither wanted palace protocol standing between an honest conversation. Camilla finally broke the silence. She admitted that losing Highgrove felt like proof that her place beside Charles had never been truly secure. As she continued speaking, the anger that had driven her for days slowly gave way to something much more vulnerable. She confessed she had expected Catherine to celebrate the transfer, believing she would see it as a final victory after years of quiet tension. Instead, Catherine answered softly, "No woman should find happiness in another woman losing her home." Without any sense of triumph, she acknowledged the years Camilla had spent at Highgrove, the memories she had created there, and the personal meaning the estate had always held for her. But Catherine also made one point unmistakably clear. Showing compassion would never mean abandoning the responsibility Charles had entrusted to her. After a brief silence, Catherine made an unexpected offer. Camilla would be given as much private time as she needed to remove her personal belongings without staff watching every moment or strict deadlines adding further humiliation. She also promised that one section of the gardens personally developed by Camilla would continue to be preserved, provided it was never used to question the transfer or suggest any future claim over Highgrove. For the first time, Camilla allowed herself to reveal what had truly motivated her actions. According to a documented household account describing a later private conversation, her desire to retain permanent control had not begun with ambition alone. It had begun with fear. Fear that once Charles's reign ended, she would gradually become irrelevant, remembered only as part of a previous chapter in royal history. Catherine listened carefully. She acknowledged that fear could explain many decisions, but it could never justify limiting the future of the next generation. After a long pause, Camilla quietly accepted that distinction. She agreed she would not challenge the transfer. The understanding remained completely private. Beyond the gates of Highgrove, the public knew nothing about the fragile peace beginning to form between the two women. The conflict inside the estate was finally approaching its end. But outside its walls, an unexpected headline was about to transform a private family decision into a nationwide royal controversy. By the following morning, the secret was no longer confined within the walls of Highgrove. Britain woke to news of a royal transfer that appeared to reshape the future of the monarchy. Television networks debated the implications, newspapers rushed out special editions, and cameras quickly gathered outside the estate. One headline captured the nation's attention more than any other: the future queen entrusted with the king's most personal legacy. Almost overnight, Catherine became the focus of every royal discussion. The story was no longer simply about a country estate. Many commentators described the decision as a defining generational shift, placing Catherine not only beside William but also at the center of Charles's private legacy. Her stewardship represented far more than responsibility for a property. It meant preserving the estate, protecting its traditions, and carrying its purpose into the next era of the monarchy. Before speculation could grow further, the palace released a carefully prepared statement. It confirmed that Catherine would oversee Highgrove as part of the royal family's long-term succession planning. Those arrangements were designed to ensure that royal residences, responsibilities, and traditions would pass smoothly from one generation to the next. Although the announcement was written in calm language, its significance was impossible to ignore. Supporters soon gathered near the entrance to Highgrove. Some left flowers and messages congratulating Catherine, describing her as the natural guardian of the estate's future. Others expressed sympathy for Camilla, believing no one should lose a place they had called home in such a public manner. For many, Highgrove had become a symbol of continuity. For others, it represented personal loss. Camilla watched the television coverage alone. When one broadcaster described her departure as the closing chapter of her influence over Charles's private world, she quietly reached for the remote and turned the television off before the report had finished. Although she had privately accepted the transfer, hearing strangers reduce her pain to headlines reopened old wounds. Catherine, meanwhile, rejected every suggestion that she immediately visit Highgrove. According to a documented palace briefing, she made it clear that she would not appear at the estate while Camilla's departure was still underway. The decision surprised many royal observers. It protected Camilla's dignity while quietly strengthening Catherine's own reputation for restraint and compassion. Shortly afterward, Charles released one additional statement. The king accepted full responsibility for the transfer and emphasized that Catherine had neither requested nor influenced the decision. With those few words, he removed any suggestion that she had played a role in Camilla's loss. As preparations began for the final handover, Charles returned to Highgrove knowing the last chapter had yet to be written. What happened there would ultimately determine whether history remembered his decision as an act of necessity, an act of compassion, or a painful combination of both. The world had already formed its opinions through newspaper headlines and television debates. But the true meaning of Highgrove would never be decided by public commentary. It would be determined quietly by the three people whose lives had been changed forever. The final handover took place without celebration. There were no cameras inside. No speeches. No smiling family photographs. Charles returned to Highgrove carrying the emotional weight of a decision that had secured the monarchy's future while deeply affecting the present. Camilla prepared to leave with a calmer heart than she had expected only days earlier. Catherine arrived not as someone claiming victory, but as the woman now entrusted with protecting a home built through another generation's memories. William remained nearby as the family gathered for the final transition. The estate would continue serving the future royal household, while preserving everything Charles had created throughout the years. Catherine's stewardship would begin not with change, but with preservation. The gardens, charitable projects, household traditions, and environmental principles that Charles had nurtured would remain untouched. Near the entrance, Charles and Camilla shared one final private moment before her departure. The silence between them carried more emotion than any argument they had exchanged before. Charles quietly explained that transferring Highgrove had never been a rejection of their marriage or the years they had shared together. Instead, it reflected his determination to ensure that fear would never shape the monarchy's future. Camilla listened without interruption. Although the decision had caused her great pain, she now understood it had not been made out of anger or punishment. Slowly, she reached into her handbag and removed the estate key. According to a documented household account, she placed it gently into Charles's hand before admitting something she had struggled to accept. Holding on too tightly to Highgrove had ultimately caused the very loss she had hoped to prevent. Her attempt to secure permanent authority had transformed a place of belonging into a source of conflict. With that, she quietly walked away. Only after Camilla had left did Catherine open the official stewardship file. Inside, she discovered a handwritten note from Charles. In it, the king asked her to protect Highgrove as a sanctuary for the family, never allowing it to become a symbol of triumph over another woman. Catherine read the message carefully. She understood that accepting the estate also meant protecting the memories of those who had come before her. William then turned toward his father and promised that Highgrove would always remain faithful to the principles Charles had spent decades building. He spoke not of ownership, but of continuity, responsibility, and family. For the first time in many days, a quiet sense of relief appeared on the king's face. His decision had never been about giving Catherine a prize. It had always been about entrusting her with a responsibility he believed she would carry with dignity. Highgrove entered a new chapter in royal history. Charles secured the future. Camilla accepted the boundary. And Catherine inherited not a victory, but a lasting duty. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.